What if I told you that one single year quietly rewrote how Hollywood understood failure? That 1980 wasn't just a bad year at the box office, but a turning point the industry tried to bury? Because this wasn't bad luck. It was hubris colliding with a changing audience, an aging studio system, and budgets that spiraled beyond control. The old rules stopped working. The machine didn't notice. Let's dive into the 12 worst box office disasters of 1980 when Hollywood flew too close to the sun. Heaven's Gate arrived carrying the full weight of artistic prestige. United Artists believed they were financing the next great American epic, led by a director who had just delivered a Best Picture winner. The studio granted him unprecedented freedom, no limits, no oversight. What this was supposed to be proof that art could justify excess. Instead, production spiraled into chaos. Filming dragged on for months beyond schedule. Entire sets were rebuilt repeatedly to satisfy obsessive detail demands. Endless takes consumed time and money. Costs ballooned past $40 million, an almost unthinkable figure for the era. Inside the studio, confidence eroded day by day as invoices piled up. When the film finally opened in November 1980, the response was merciless. Critics tore it apart. Theatrical bookings evaporated almost instantly. Some theaters pulled it after a single week. Box office receipts barely registered against its colossal budget. The fallout reshaped Hollywood. United Artists collapsed and was sold shortly after. Studio power shifted overnight. As creative freedom was no longer romantic, it was dangerous. Heaven's Gate became a cautionary symbol of ambition unchecked, marking the end of an era. Xanadu was designed to feel unstoppable. A glossy musical powered by a chart-topping soundtrack, a beloved star, and the shimmering promise of disco-era fantasy. The studio chased youth culture, crossover appeal, and pop spectacle, convinced that style alone could carry the film across every demographic. What arrived instead confused nearly everyone. The story drifted without logic. The tone lurched wildly between nostalgic throwback and futuristic fantasy. Roller skating collided with Greek mythology, romance, and neon dreamscapes, all competing for attention. Audiences struggled to understand who the film was for, or why these elements were sharing the same screen. Released in August 1980, Xanadu faltered immediately. It earned barely $23 million domestically against a production budget estimated near $20 million before marketing costs were factored in. Critics were merciless, labeling it shallow, incoherent, and emblematic of indulgence without discipline. The damage wasn't explosive, but it was lasting. The star's film career cooled sharply. Studios became wary of music-driven projects that treated soundtracks as substitutes for story. For years, Xanadu survived mostly as a cultural punchline, its glitter remembered more clearly than its narrative, until later audiences reclaimed it ironically, transforming failure into camp legend. Raise the Titanic sounded bold enough to sell itself. Adapted from a best-selling novel and backed by a major studio, the film promised spectacle, suspense, and cutting-edge technical achievement. The marketing leaned hard on scale. This was positioned as an event, an engineering marvel brought to life on screen. The real disaster was cost. Massive water tanks were constructed. Full-scale mechanical replicas were built and rebuilt. Logistical problems multiplied daily. Every technical solution created a new setback, and every setback demanded more money. Production expenses ballooned beyond $40 million, an extraordinary figure for the era. Long before release, the spectacle had already consumed the film. When it finally arrived in theaters in July 1980, the outcome was devastating. Domestic box office receipts barely cleared $7 million. International markets failed to rescue it. The gap between investment and return was staggering, and executives struggled to explain it away. Later admissions were brutally honest. The film would have needed blockbuster-level earnings simply to break even, an impossible task given its muted reception and lack of urgency. Raise the Titanic became industry shorthand for financial catastrophe, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. It proved that technical ambition without emotional pull could sink even the most expensive ship. Can't Stop the Music believed popularity was enough. A real-world music phenomenon at its peak. Radio hits everywhere. A glossy, celebratory tone designed to feel like a victory lap. The studio moved fast, convinced cultural momentum could be bottled and sold before it faded. And the expectation was simple. Fans would show up out of loyalty. The energy of the music would carry everything else. Story, structure, even comedy were treated as secondary. Speed mattered more than craft. What arrived in theaters felt outdated on release. The humor landed awkwardly. Performances strained to manufacture enthusiasm. Instead of feeling current, the film already seemed behind the curve. Audiences sensed the desperation and stayed away. Released in June 1980, the film grossed under $2 million domestically. For a wide theatrical release, the number was catastrophic. Critics were brutal, calling it shallow, misguided, and painfully out of touch with the moment it tried to celebrate. The fallout was immediate. The film became shorthand for industry panic. What happens when studios chase trends instead of understanding them? Its reputation hardened fast, transforming from failed cash-in to cultural cautionary tale. Most famously, the film inspired a satirical award ceremony devoted to cinematic failure, an unintended legacy that outlived the movie itself. Meanwhile, as this spectacle collapsed loudly, another project drowned quietly, buried beneath cold science fiction ambition rather than glitter. Saturn III arrived dressed as prestige science fiction, a psychological thriller set in deep space, major stars, a respected studio. The promise was intensity, claustrophobic fear paired with futuristic menace. This wasn't meant to be pulp. It was positioned as serious genre filmmaking with adult ambitions. But the expectation was controlled success. Smart science fiction that felt cerebral without alienating mainstream audiences. The studio believed it could satisfy a post-space race appetite for darker material while still delivering box office stability. Behind the scenes, the project never settled. Rewrites continued deep into production. Effects teams lagged behind schedule. Entire sequences were reworked late, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes out of panic. The tone shifted constantly. Cold and ominous one moment, oddly melodramatic the next. Precision gave way to confusion. Released early in 1980, Saturn III grossed roughly $9 million domestically against a significantly higher budget. The shortfall wasn't explosive, but it was undeniable. Critics found it emotionally distant. Audiences failed to engage. As careers survived, but momentum didn't. The film vanished quickly from theaters, remembered less as a disaster than as a missed opportunity, another science fiction concept that looked far stronger on paper than on screen. Halfway through these failures, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Hollywood kept spending. The market kept saying no. Popeye entered production wrapped in goodwill, a beloved comic icon, a director celebrated for visual daring, a star riding the peak of mainstream popularity. On paper, it felt like a sure thing. Hollywood rarely gets alignment this clean. The studio approved a budget that climbed past $20 million. Confident charm would do the rest. What followed was endurance filmmaking. Massive seaside sets were constructed and left permanently in place. Shooting schedules stretched. Weather caused delays. The tone drifted further into eccentricity with every revision. What was meant to be whimsical began to feel alien. Studio confidence quietly eroded as costs mounted. Released in December 1980, the film earned roughly $60 million worldwide, respectable by surface standards, disappointing once the full financial picture was clear. Marketing costs swallowed much of the return. Expectations had been higher, much higher. The consequences were restrained but lasting. The studio retreated from similarly risky, director-driven adaptations. The film's strange rhythm confused general audiences, even as some embraced it later. Popeye didn't implode. It lingered. Over time, it became a cult object, studied, debated, and reappraised. But in the moment, it was a warning. And even beloved icons couldn't guarantee safety anymore. And while Popeye stumbled gently, the next remake collapsed without mercy. The Jazz Singer was sold as reverent reinvention, a modern take on a foundational Hollywood title, updated with contemporary emotion and star power. The studio believed prestige alone would pull audiences in. History would do the marketing. The expectation was awards attention, adult audiences, respect. This was not meant to feel flashy. It was positioned as important, serious, necessary. The response was immediate rejection. Critics dismissed it as hollow. Audiences ignored it altogether. Whatever emotional urgency the studio hoped to revive never materialized on screen. The film felt trapped between eras, honoring neither the past nor the present. Released in December 1980, The Jazz Singer grossed under $30 million worldwide against a substantial budget. The numbers weren't catastrophic, but they were unmistakably disappointing. Momentum evaporated fast. The consequences were quiet but instructive. Studios became wary of touching sacred titles without a compelling reason. Nostalgia, they learned, could be fragile. Mishandled, it turned cold. The film itself slipped into obscurity. Rarely revisited, rarely defended. A reminder that history alone couldn't carry a movie forward. And sometimes, failure didn't require expense at all. The Nude Bomb assumed familiarity was enough. A hit television property, recognizable characters, built-in affection. The studio believed the transition to theaters would be effortless. Audiences already loved the brand. Why wouldn't they show up? What they delivered felt misjudged from the first reel. The humor was thin, the pacing sluggish. What worked in short episodic bursts collapsed at feature length. Jokes stretched past their limits. Energy drained fast. Released in 1980, the film opened to weak attendance and unforgiving reviews. It scraped past $14 million domestically, far below expectations for a known property. Word of mouth stalled immediately. The consequences were definitive. The franchise stopped dead. No sequels. No cinematic expansion. Theatrical ambitions were quietly abandoned. Television, once the strength, became the ceiling. The lesson landed hard across the industry. Brand recognition didn't equal theatrical viability. Not everything scaled up. Some things shrank under pressure. And speaking of pressure, the next film tried to sell grit, only to deliver confusion instead. The Island arrived carrying serious weight, a major studio backing it, a best-selling novel as its foundation, high-profile stars positioned as proof of prestige. This wasn't supposed to be escapist adventure. It was marketed as realism, danger, and moral grit, something tougher, something grown up. The expectation was clear. Audiences would be drawn to its promise of authenticity, brutal environments, physical endurance, a survival narrative that leaned into discomfort instead of fantasy. The studio treated it as a smart counter-programming play in an era crowded with spectacle. Behind the scenes, nothing stayed smooth. Production delays piled up. Creative disagreements surfaced in post-production. Editing became a rescue mission rather than refinement. And what should have felt immersive began to feel strained. Released in June 1980, the film earned just over $21 million domestically against a budget approaching $20 million before marketing costs. On paper, it survived. In reality, it barely limped across the line. Critics were unforgiving, calling the tone uneven and the execution muddled. The consequences were subtle but real. The studio quietly moved on. No franchise talk, no long tail. Careers continued, but the ambition evaporated. The Island didn't explode. It simply disappeared. Another example of how seriousness alone couldn't save a project when clarity was missing. And while that failure faded quietly, the next one failed with charm that never quite landed. Rough Cut was built on confidence, international locations, elegant pacing, a pairing meant to spark effortless chemistry. The studio believed it was offering smart escapism. Romance mixed with intrigue, danger softened by wit. The expectation was comfort. This was supposed to glide through theaters on charm alone. a polished thriller that didn't demand too much, but promised enough style to feel upscale. In another decade, it might have worked. Instead, audiences shrugged. The tone felt dated. The rhythm felt slow. What once seemed sophisticated now felt distant. Released in 1980, the film failed to connect with viewers looking for sharper edges and faster stakes. Box office returns told the story quickly. Rough Cut earned less than half of its production cost. Marketing didn't help. Word of mouth stalled. Critics found it pleasant but forgettable, damning praise in a crowded marketplace. And the studio absorbed the loss without panic, but the message was received. Mid-budget star vehicles were losing their power. Familiar formulas no longer guaranteed attention. Rough Cut didn't crash. It drifted. And in Hollywood, drifting can be just as fatal. Then came a project that aimed higher and fell harder. The formula wanted relevance, oil politics, corporate conspiracy, global tension. This was serious adult storytelling, positioned as timely and important. Big stars were brought in to anchor credibility. The studio hoped gravity would translate into success. The expectation was engagement. Audiences would lean in. They would appreciate complexity. They would reward ambition. What they got felt distant. The narrative was dense. The pacing heavy. The intrigue never fully ignited. Instead of suspense, there was detachment. Instead of urgency, confusion. Released in December 1980, the film earned under $15 million domestically. For a project of its scale and cast, that number was a quiet disaster. Critics noted its intelligence, but questioned its emotional pull. The consequences weren't explosive, but they were instructive. Studios began rethinking politically dense thrillers without clear emotional anchors. Complexity, they realized, needed accessibility. The formula didn't damage careers outright, but it reinforced a growing truth of 1980. Serious themes alone weren't enough. Audiences wanted clarity, momentum, and payoff. And with that realization, Hollywood stepped reluctantly into a new era, wiser, tighter, and far more cautious than before. Bon Voyage, Charlie Brown, and Don't Come Back should have been safe. A beloved comic strip. Familiar characters. A built-in audience that had already followed Charlie Brown through television specials for over a decade. United Feature Syndicate and Paramount believed nostalgia alone would carry it. The expectation was modest but confident. An animated feature timed for families, leveraging brand recognition rather than spectacle. The budget stayed relatively controlled by Hollywood standards, hovering around $12 million. No risks, no controversy, just comfort. What went wrong was indifference. Released in May 1980, the film arrived in a theatrical landscape that was changing fast. Audiences were flocking to louder, sharper entertainment. As compared to the kinetic energy of contemporary hits, Bon Voyage felt sleepy. The pacing was gentle. The jokes were mild. The story drifted. Box office returns were disastrous. The film earned barely $4 million domestically. Even ancillary markets couldn't soften the blow. For a brand that had once felt bulletproof, the message was clear. Familiarity was no longer enough. The consequences rippled quietly but decisively. Major studios backed away from theatrical peanuts projects. Animation budgets tightened. Television became the franchise's safe harbor once again. Theatrical animation itself entered a period of uncertainty. Bon Voyage didn't spark outrage or mockery. It simply vanished, a reminder that even the most trusted brands could fail when the machine misunderstood what audiences wanted. And with that final miscalculation, as 1980 closed the book on one of Hollywood's most sobering years. These 12 disasters didn't just fail individually. Together, they forced an industry-wide reckoning. Budgets tightened. Creative control narrowed. Studios chased safer formulas. The blockbuster era became more calculated, less indulgent. The myth of Hollywood as an unstoppable dream factory cracked that year. Behind the curtain, fear replaced confidence. And as the lights dimmed on 1980, the machine quietly rewired itself, hoping audiences wouldn't notice the cost.